Hello, good morning. Secret talks between Donald Trump's team and Ukrainian opposition leaders have sparked controversy, focusing on early presidential elections in Ukraine despite constitutional prohibitions under martial law. Trump's motivations seem to align with Moscow's interests, raising concerns about US interference. The Ukrainian government has opposed elections during wartime, citing them as impossible. The US has scaled back military aid, increasing pressure on President Volodymyr Zelensky. As tensions escalate with these secret talks and the US pressure ultimately leading to Zelensky's ousting, perhaps. And what implications might this have for Ukraine's political stability and its relations with the US and Russia? Welcome to In Depth. So Donald Trump's team is pushing for soft regime change in Ukraine, potentially undermining Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership. According to The Independent, this effort involves private lobbying and public criticism, echoing Kremlin narratives. The suspension of US military aid and intelligence sharing followed strained relations, significantly boosting Russia. Several potential successors to Zelensky, each with varying degrees of support and controversies, are in view. Trump's influence on the selection of Zelensky's replacement raises concerns about geopolitical strategy and the future of US-Ukraine relations. The situation highlights the risks of potential complexities and the war, of course, and external interference. US and Ukrainian officials are set to meet next week to discuss steps towards ending the war with Russia. The New York Times said that Ukraine will insist on several commitments from Russia, including a ceasefire and protection of civilian infrastructure. Despite Moscow's lack of public commitment, Russia has shown interest in continuing discussions. President Trump has expressed optimism about reaching a peace agreement, suggesting both Ukraine and Russia have no alternative but to negotiate. The meeting follows recent tensions between Trump and President Zelensky, including a suspension of military aid to Ukraine.
In the midst of escalating tensions between Washington and Kiev, a dramatic development has emerged. Secret talks between top Trump allies and Ukrainian opposition leaders. The discussions, involving 4 senior members of Donald Trump's team, have centered on the possibility of holding early presidential elections in Ukraine, despite the country being under martial law due to the ongoing conflict with Russia. These clandestine meetings have involved prominent figures such as Yulia Tymoshenko, a former prime minister known for her political ambitions, and senior members of former President Petro Poroshenko's party. The talks are seen as part of a broader effort by Washington to pressure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to step down, aligning with Moscow's long-standing goal of removing him from power. The U.S. decision to suspend military aid to Ukraine has further heightened tensions, underscoring the political anxiety in Kiev, while Zelensky has emphasized Ukraine's readiness to engage in peace talks. But the situation remains tense, following a contentious meeting with Trump in the Oval Office. Trump's allies believe that Zelensky would lose any election due to public discontent over the prolonged war and corruption issues. However, recent polls suggest that Zelensky still maintains a strong lead in popularity, with 44% support, while his closest rivals trail significantly behind. As Ukraine navigates this complex landscape, the country's political leaders are increasingly aware that without U.S. support, their future remains uncertain. The secret talks between Trump's team and Ukrainian opposition leaders have sparked concerns about the potential for instability and the influence of external powers on Ukraine's internal politics.
Now, joining us from America, we have Dr. Ashraf Singer, a world politics analyst, and from Cairo, and also Mykola Baston is joining us from Kiev, an academic and political researcher. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. I'll start with you, Professor Singer. What do you make of these secret talks with Ukrainian opposition leaders?
It's a message to Europe, not really only to Ukraine. Donald Trump is changing, the main theme of the U.S. foreign policy. So Trump believed that Russia is more important than Europe now. Basically, he does need to bring Russia with, the new foreign policy framework, with the U.S. Probably this is currently help him to contain China. So this is the major theme of his foreign policy visions. So make that divisions. It's a very crucial, very critical, changing. What United States did really invest in Ukraine to stop Putin critique, his invasion, or maybe the consequences of Putin invasion of Ukraine threats, has been a threat to the democracy. It's a huge shift, but that kind of secret talk with the opposition in Ukraine definitely is not really popular. Or what I can say that still Zelensky is very popular among the Ukrainians, particularly in time of war. You cannot really push to change the leader now. And I don't think, the opposition, they have that kind of popularity among the Ukrainians. So it seems to me like Ukrainians now pretty one voice, and they were getting huge support from Europe, particularly France and UK, that Europe will not leave Ukraine by herself or by itself. So Ukraine will not be alone, and this is really a huge threat to the Russia, because Russia was dreaming, that is, without that kind of huge support of the United States. So this is probably now the peace based on the Russian condition will be achieved. But it seems to me like France and UK, they are not really accepting, that kind of shift of the U.S. foreign policy. So now it's really really crucial in transatlantic relationship, particularly between Europe and United States. They need really to fix their problem before to thinking, to change the position in Ukraine, changing, Zelensky in Ukraine.
Okay, and coming to you, Professor Baston in Kiev, what has been the reaction in Kiev to these secret talks that the Trump administration has apparently been having?
May peace be upon you. Yes, regarding the elections now in Ukraine, this has been discussed over and over during the past few years. After the end of Zelensky term for 5 years, and in this discussion, we have seen that the popular opinion in Ukraine is unified, that these elections cannot be run now, currently with the fight continuing and the war ongoing. There are a lot of concerns, and this will raise a lot of issues in the Ukrainian community and for the public opinion. And it is not feasible or applicable even for the opposition officials, including the previous president for Ukraine. He said that these elections will not have a winner. Only Putin will benefit from such elections.
And coming back to you, Professor Singer, what are the U.S. foreign policy objectives when it comes to Europe at the moment?
Yeah, it's the main objective of United States, or Trump, as he said in advance many times, that he was interested in increasing, the military burden, of Europe or the NATO member. So that kind of, what we heard from Elon Musk or from Trump, that United States probably will withdraw from NATO, and this is a big disaster. You can't really imagine how that policy can really be implemented. United States without NATO or Europe without United States is a big disaster for running the international politics. So that kind of a change in foreign policy, or a huge change or a huge shift in United States foreign policy, it's a pretty dangerous in that degree of stability. But it seems to me like President Trump is making the opposite directions of President Biden. So now the situation is not about thinking rationally about what is going on in the world politics, but it's about like what my ex president did, I will do the opposite. But this is will not help Europe, of course. But it seems to me like Europe got really uh, a clear message that United States is changing, the status quo, and Europe definitely will act fastly to protect its security. And I like that kind of the frame where England and UK and France, they made that kind of, like the reliable plan how to fill the gap where United States, is moving out. So it seems to me like, during Trump presidency, maybe we expect a huge shift, and this is will put too much pressure in Europe and Ukraine. But it's still Zelensky in his leadership in Ukraine is very significant, very popular, and any kind of action by Trump to change Zelensky by inviting, the opposition's leaders to run Ukraine, it seems to me, or my best understanding, that the people in Ukraine are not ready to make that change during the time of war.
Okay, coming back to you, Professor Baston, do you agree with Dr. Singer there, who says that Europe is trying to fill the gap that the US has left? And are the days of the delivery of military aid to Ukraine by the United States over?
Yes, in fact, there is a gap to be bridged, and the Ukraine now is in a very critical position, and this was expected following the election of President Donald Trump. It was clear that he will have a great policy shift, contradicting with Biden and dealing with Ukraine in a different way to find alternative for the military aid. And he's now working in this regard. Europe now is becoming more aware of that Ukraine is the only protective shield protecting Europe from the Russian aggression. Um, Europe now is working to adopt a new approach to provide Ukraine with the aid as an alternative for the United States. Now Europe is aware that they have to develop a self efficiency to not rely on the United States anymore. We have seen the summit held in London and other talks held all over Europe, and as stated by the Polish Prime Minister, that Europe has a population of 500 million people. And why would you ask Europe now to be protected by the United States of America with only 300 million people population? Europe is more than capable to protect itself, protect the continent and the neighboring countries. I think using these capabilities and taking advantage of the European resources is a new European approach. I don't think Europe is fully ready for this, but I think this way of thinking and this mentality is a positive thing.
Okay, and Dr. Singer, coming back to you, um, what do you make of this trying to push for early presidential elections in Ukraine by the United States? What does the U.S. hope to get out of this? Is it regime change?
Oh, yeah, this is actually it's a backfire by Trump, because of the last meeting, with Zelensky. Um, the reaction by Zelensky at the White House didn't really admire or like, Trump and his team. So basically, this is kind of sanctions or punishment from Trump towards Zelensky. It's better off to remove Zelensky from leading Ukraine. This is probably with the new leadership or new leaders from the opposition party of that probably they can really agree on Trump plan, to get that peace done with Russia. But it seems to me like probably the current administration, Trump administration now, sometimes they can really send some words or some statements, and their actions later on probably different than the beginning. So the beginning with Trump is not really the ending of Trump foreign policy or even domestic policy. So it seems to me now like Europe is waiting because this is Europe issue, not only Ukraine issue, because Europe needs really to figure out clearly what is the grand plan of Trump. Is really Trump um, interested in just shaking the status quo for pushing Europe to pay more in terms of the military defense or the military budget, or just talking without really reach the resolution that can really get the peace done between Ukraine and Russia. Keep in your mind and in my mind that Ukraine and Russia they made or they went through many negotiations, many meetings. They were really solid on their positions. So it's not easy that can really bring these two guys and end the Ukraine war, in Ukraine-Russia war, now. It does require like changing, the positions of Russia and changing the position of Ukraine. What my best understanding after I made that quantitative analysis to see what is the future of this war can be solved, I found that Crimea and the current territories that Russia occupied, this is really hard that we can really move Russia back. Still, Russia is a middle power, is not really a dominant power in Europe, but it's still middle power with nuclear arsenal. So we consider that in that equation. So basically, keeping Ukraine out of NATO or keeping Ukraine out of that kind of protections like Finland and Sweden, this is may increase Russia, desire to invade Ukraine again. And this is the point that Zelensky need really to make sure that the future of Ukraine is not really under uncertain situation or uncertain perspective. We need he and his people in Ukraine need really to get like that protections from the NATO. But Trump now is really saying, okay, NATO is really making like a huge burden United States. So United States, I don't understand what the consequences, what is the consequences of this policy in the future of Europe and United States. This is one of the major division between United States and Europe. Currently, they need really to fix this kind of, like division between NATO members, particularly between United States and others, NATO members.
Okay. And Professor Baston, would you say that Zelensky's days are over, basically? His political future is not looking good because of what Trump has said and done over the past week? And also, if there were to be elections, could they happen under these wartime situations and under martial law?
For Zelensky's days as a politician, of course, he's a president of a democratic state that will not be overthrown like this. But for the potential for holding an election that coincides with the war in Ukraine, there is no prospect for our potential or even a way to enable the elections. The entire society, including the opposition and the people, the military, all Ukrainian entities and factions are unified that holding an election now is impossible. And recognizing this fact, Zelensky will remain in his office until it is possible to actually run the elections. Now there will be negotiations and discussions that is partly announced and partly confidential regarding the ceasefire and signing into a settlement between Russia and Ukraine. We don't really know all the details. Will these negotiations take long, or will they be productive in a short period of time? It is very difficult to anticipate.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we'll have to cut you off there, Professor Baston, because we're just out of time. But thank you very much to both of my guests today, Dr. Ashraf Singer, a world politics analyst, and also Michaelo Baston, an academic and political researcher. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us here on Q News. And that brings us to the end of this episode of In Depth. Thanks for being here. Good day.